You want. Good morning again. And this is our third session of wandering through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And I want to thank you all for being here. I have to do a lot of preparation for these things. I was telling Robin earlier, and and that's why I love it, because when you're trying to present something like this, you got to dig in, and this is a lot less familiar to me uh, than the big book. So I'm learning a lot by doing it. Um, we've had this our third session. The first session was really pretty random. I didn't feel great about it. I was trying to cover a lot of ground. It's just sort of a random introduction to all this stuff. The second one, we started talking about Ignatius and what he was like, and so the framework that we're working with, we're trying to compare this to Bill's story and its effect on our work in AA. So we are talking about what Saint Ignatius was like before he went through this spiritual awakening, what happened, which is the details of the spiritual awakening in this period of his life where he was wandering around, and then what we are like now, which would be the last section that we're going to be dealing with, but which is when he is in Rome with the Society of Jesus, and the Superior General is what his name was for a guy that was really focused on humility. Superior General. Can you imagine walking into an AA meeting and asking, well, who's the Superior General around here? So today we're going to review a little bit about what he was like, and also, um, more importantly, talk about this conversion experience that he went through. And and along the way, I'm going to be trying to relate it to the experiences that we have in AA. So. So we're going to start. I want to start with. Oh, I want to start with a prayer for one thing. And where did I put these guys? Um, I can't hear this prayer enough. I have to change a few words, but this is Thomas Merton's prayer. And if you just search Merton's prayer, Merton, it'll pop right up. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. So, to relate that to our AA lexicon, when he says, I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, I translate that to my desire to ask you to mold my ideals and help me live up to them, is what my higher power wants me to do. I can tell you that the greatest challenge in the book remains for me the step 11 challenge to ask God to direct my thinking. I just, I get, what do you mean direct my thinking? I'm in charge of my thinking. I don't want you directing my thinking. And then it says, especially divorcing my thinking from all the things that I think about, self-pity, self-delusion, self-seeking, all that stuff. Um, so, but I think when I'm asking God to mold my ideals and help me live up to them, which for me is much richer than praying only for knowledge of your will for me and the power to carry that out, um, that works for me in a certain kind of way. And especially when I get into trouble when something's happening that I'm not real happy about, asking God to mold my ideals and help me live up to them is a great way out. One other little reading I wanted to do before we get into this. This is Emmett Fox, and if you've worked with the Emmett Fox reader, the Around the Year with Emmett Fox, this is September 11th. If you're interested, if you want to see the original, it's in his book called Make Your Life Worthwhile. So he's running through keywords in the Bible and defining them, and I just thought this is fascinating. This is about the word wicked, W-I-C-K-E-D. The word wicked occurs more than 300 times in the Bible. And one of the most important terms to be found therein, in the Bible, the word wicked doesn't mean evil, really means bewitched or under a spell. The law of being is perfect harmony, and that truth never changes, but man uses his free will, humans use their free will to think wrongly. And thus, we build up false conditions around us and then believe them to be real. They look real, and so we forget that we ourselves made them. And thus, we bewitch ourselves or throw ourselves under a kind of spell. And of course, as long as we remain bewitched in this way, we have to suffer the consequences. Nevertheless, it is only illusion or a spell, and it can be broken by turning to God. So, my experience so far is that this whole AA thing, our steps, everything we do, our meetings, our one-on-one work, our service commitments, and particularly our prayer and meditation, are geared toward us breaking this spell so that we can honestly and humbly ask God to mold our ideals and give us the power to live up to them, because lack of power is always the dilemma. At least it is for me. Whenever I get uncomfortable, I can immediately go to, or angry, by the way, because I know when I get angry or resentful, or remorseful, which is anger at the self, it means I'm frightened by something. And what I'm always frightened about is my lack of power. And what I always lack power over is me. It's, if I really break down what I'm afraid of, it's not what I tell you I'm afraid of. I have a friend who's traveling in Europe, and his bag didn't come through and the flight was delayed. And, we've talked about this before, because I get anxious when I travel, and I'll tell you I'm anxious because my bag's not going to make it. That's not what I'm anxious about. What I'm anxious about is how I am going to react when I get the notification that your bag didn't make it. You understand what I'm trying to say? It's not so much that the bag, so what? The bags, they're going to deliver it to me. That's what they do. But I get anxious because I know I'm going to go into this, sort of state. And so what we are seeking is power over our reactions to life in accordance with asking God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. Okay, so I'm going to go to, now I start getting confused. No, that's the second one. There it is. Okay. Told you, this is more complicated. This is a lot harder than the big book. Okay, so we're going to review a couple of things about Ignatius's experience before he goes, Ignatius's life before he goes through this experience. So I'll remind you that he's born in 1491. He's born into a noble family. He's the last of 13 children, big family. And so he's brought up in that whole atmosphere. And this, what I wanted to remind you, I'm working with two books primarily. This one I sent you all, told you about this one. This is called The Pilgrim's Journey. This is his autobiography as he dictated it to a fellow Jesuit toward the end of his life. And it only covers his life from his conversion experience, his wounding uh, in when he was fighting in Pamplona was the name of the town, but um, through when the autobiography was written, which is toward the end of his life, I think 5 or 6 years before he died. It's fairly sparse, and so this has a lot of footnotes and a lot of commentary by the translator, which is a challenge in this work. You know, it's just like the Bible. We're dealing with translations. We're not dealing with the original language, and you know how a translator, how different the spiritual exercises. 5,000 editions of the spiritual exercises, which really means 5,000 translations from some language to another language. And they can be dramatically different in the way they feel. And it's taken me some time to find the one that I'm most comfortable with. So we're working with that, but we're also working with this, which you can't get. This is not a book or it'll cost you a lot of money, Alone and on Foot. And I'm beginning to suspect that the guy that did this is alcoholic. Because there's one chapter that he talks about and he calls it faith and works. And that's just a hallmark of our whole idea. This is a matter of faith and work, understanding and effectiveness. Understanding is mental, effectiveness is behavioral. And so I'm beginning to believe that he's a Jesuit, and he's working off of something else, not to go into that. But what I'm looking at is some copies I've made of this stuff and parts that I want to read and discuss with you. Okay, then this is chapter 4. Doesn't matter. It's called The Courtly Life, and he has little headings for each section. And this first section is called Valiant Knight. So you got to understand, it's what I'm hoping to do is compare Ignatius's story with Bill's story. And there's Bill's story on Wall Street in New York City, the center of the universe, and he's really into money. But that's what really into money and alcohol. Ignatius, it turns out, was also into money, alcohol, and also sex. But that was a big deal for him, and I'll be reading something about that later. So uh, for him, loyal vassal, valiant knight, these were magic terms for him. And then he says this: Ignatius's field of vision quickly became much wider than it had been at Loyola. He's working for a noble person. Ignatius was thrilled by the refined court music and wanted to learn to play musical instruments. He was interested also in, he's 15 years old at this time, interested also in books dealing with chivalry, and the older boys would secretly pass these books along to him. Battles, tournaments, famous exploits, feats of glory. He would identify with the brilliant image he had dreamed up for himself, one in which he would surpass all other valiant knights. This is a very competitive guy, and he's competing in the with the other knights in shining armor. And um, one of the hallmarks for me about Ignatius is that he really focuses on the imagination. The imagination is used in the spiritual exercises a lot, and he's focused on the feelings that he has, in the interior feelings that he has as a result of the things that he's imagining. And his great discovery while he's laying there recovering from being wounded in this battle of knights, he broke his leg and then tries to get his leg reshaped. um, his discovery was that when he was focused on knights in shining armor, he felt good till he stopped thinking about it or reading a book about it or whatever. But when he focused on the life of Christ or the lives of the saints, he would feel good, and that consolation is what he eventually winds up calling it, would last. So it's really interesting for me in AA. I feel that our test of truth is, does it work for you? You know, where are the we do not proclaim this is the concept of higher power you've got to have. There's only one, and we know what it is, and you got to have it. The way the Catholic Church essentially was operating. Um, but our test of truth is, does it work? You know, when it says before the third step, the first requirement is that we see our life as not working. Um, we quit playing God. Why do we quit playing God? Because it does not work. That's what's important. And does not work in Ignatius' world shows up in the feelings that he has. And I would say this whole effort that we're going through here, especially talking about his story, is to get to the spiritual exercises. And the first thing we're going to go to in the spiritual exercises is the rules for discernment. And the rules for discernment were in the opening readings that we did. And just so you know, when we're reading, it was number 2, and it was number 4. When it says annotation number, that's essentially a paragraph number of the spiritual exercises, and there are 370 paragraph numbers. And it's just like our big book. It starts off with the spiritual exercises and then eventually gets to these appendices. And one of these appendices is called the rules for discernment. So when you see in number 4, it's talking about desolation, which is defined as out of sync with God. And we know that we're out of sync with God because our feelings are of doubt, despair, and fear. And consolation is when we're in sync with God, and we know that because we have feelings of faith and hope and love. So it's real feeling oriented, and I love that. It's why I love mold my ideals and help me live up to them. It's why I love page 70, no, page 83, saying, you know, we ask our Creator each morning in meditation, show me the way of patience and tolerance and kindness and love, because they feel so much better than impatience, intolerance, selfishness, and fear. They literally feel better. And that's what I want. I want to feel better. You know, that's what drives us. Unfortunately, uh, I have to remember that in our work, the third step prayer, you know, it says, relieve me of the bondage of self. It doesn't say, so I can feel better. You know, that's what I wanted to say. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Relieve me of these uncomfortable feelings so I can feel better. It doesn't say that. Neither does the third step prayer, or the seventh step prayer. You know, I pray that you now remove from, I'm willing you have all me, good and bad, and then it's remove from me the stuff that gets in the way of me being service to you and to my fellows. Not so I can feel better, but I'm telling you, that's what's driven me. You know, what really drove me into Alcoholics Anonymous and has driven my initial period of getting sober was I just couldn't handle the hangovers. I didn't get into the trouble that a lot of people got into. I'm a high bottom drunk, but I couldn't stand the hangovers, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't stop at drink number 3 or drink number 4. I had no idea. You know, that was Silkworth's revelation was anyway. Okay, so don't want to get too far off, but um, okay, so this is just descriptions of him. He was a conceited, arrogant young man, and he gets into some legal trouble at one point. Um, so I'm not going to go into that. We talked a little bit about it. Here's something about how he dressed. Um, Ignatius bedecked in clothing designed with multicolored check materials, a red cap, sword fastened to his belt, wearing a metal breastplate and other. I mean, he's a big deal, shining knight in shining armor, heroism and all of that stuff. This was interesting. He had an aunt who was a nun, and she says to him, Ignatius, you will not learn nor become wise until somebody breaks your leg. She says this when he's maybe 25 and his leg gets broken in this whole thing that led to his conversion 6 years later when he's hit by a cannonball in Pamplona. Okay, so now he's wounded. He's laying in bed in the castle in Loyola, and asking for these books, and but he's also terrified that he's going to be physically deformed. So he goes through this horrendous operation. It's not like it was today. This is the 1500s. Horrendous operation to correct his bone, and they give him these different books, and so now we're going to get into his conversion. This is some general things about conversion. Rather than being the master of one's conversion, one is conquered by it and seduced by truth, goodness, and beauty. Conversion involves an integration of dispersed inner forces which point the person in a new direction toward another who is God. It involves a level of renunciation of which not all are capable. That's where we're reading his statement of primary purpose when we do those opening readings. And his primary purpose is to love, honor, and serve your creator, thereby save your soul. Just what the 10th step says. 10th step says, how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are questions which must go with us constantly. This is the proper use of the will. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I don't know. Gone. Sorry. Um, I don't know. I'll just move on. So, hmm. So the more about his as he's got these. This one's called Empty Years and Romantic Fantasies. Oh, um, of the many vain things which came into his mind, what one took such hold of his heart that he would spend 2 or 3 hours at a time absorbed in thinking about it. He dreamed about it, what he would do in the service of a certain lady, the means he would take to go to the land where she lived, the clever sayings and words he would speak to her, the deeds of gallantry he would do in her service. He became so wrapped up in these fantasies that he would not even consider that it would be impossible to put them into effect. For the lady was not of lesser nobility. She's a big deal. These are his words. This is what he's saying to the person that wrote down the dictation of his autobiography. He's just telling you how he would become obsessed with some idea, and that was it. So part of the conversion is that he changes from obsessed with knights in shining armor and chivalry to being obsessed with God. So one of the things that's interesting to me is to compare this to Bill's bottoming out, and how different it is, because Bill bottomed out in a horrendous physical way. You remember what's he say? No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksands stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. What happens to Ignatius is he gets overwhelmed by God. It's just interesting. They're different. They bottom out, and it takes a bottoming to raise the energy to to uh, to make a change, to try something different. Um, but Bill's and Ignatius, their bottoms are quite different. Um, this is more about his conversion experience, and the chapter is called "The Touch of God," and he's reflecting on his experience, and then this thing about inner clarity. This was the first reflection he made on the things of God, and later on, when he was composing the exercises, it was from this experience within himself that he began to draw light on what pertained to the diversity of spirits. So right away, he comes up with this feeling of two different spirits, and I personally, good and evil, right and wrong, true and false. I've had to personally translate this into my human agenda and my spiritual agenda. And I think what we in AA, we talk about self-reliance. The failure of self-reliance is the cause of fear, and turning from self-reliance to God reliance, which we do through all the things we do, particularly prayer and meditation, but service and meetings in our one-on-one work. Um, so uh, for me anyway, it's been the whole process of steps 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. I do believe has restored me to sanity, although I'm with uh, Robin says this. I don't think I ever was sane. I'm not sure I ever was sane either. But if you take sanity as a healthy, wholesome response to life, I do believe it's so much better now than it was. You know, when you look at your responses, when your responses to your life are resentment, fear, and remorse, you know, feeling bad about yourself, those are not healthy responses. And yet we, just like Emmett Fox was saying, we believe them to be true, and we wind up being stuck in them until some kind of something happens that changes what we're going to do. So one of the things that this is interesting to me is comparing the whole Catholic process with our steps, particularly 4 through 9. And one of the things that fascinates me about this whole deal is that um, Bill had no awareness of the Jesuit anything, Ignatius, the spiritual exercises, anything. And you've probably read that description of the night he's in New York City. It's raining, and somebody comes up and says, "Bill, somebody wants to come see you." And he's going, "Oh, great, another drunk," you know. And this guy hobbles up the stairs, and it's Ed Dowling, Father Ed Dowling, who is a Jesuit from St. Louis. And the remarkable thing to me is he's not an alcoholic, but he has read the book and he's seen what AA has done for other people. This is, I believe, 1944. And uh, so AA has been around now for 9 years, say. He comes to Bill to improve his relationship with God. Ain't that something? You know, a Jesuit who goes through all the stuff the Jesuits go through just to get ordained. They call it formation, but and he's coming to Bill to improve his relationship with God. Um, it, and when you start to see the parallels between the steps and these spiritual exercises, so the big deal in the Catholic thing was confession, right, and penance, which is in our language is our fifth step, where we're confessing our negative reactions to the stuff of our lives. And then eventually we get to this 6 and 7, where we're praying for removal of these things which are in the way of our being of service to God. And then we're making amends, which is our way of literally trying to change. Amend means to change our way of being, change our way that we have interacted with other people. So this is Ignatius, and this is his own words. He began to think more seriously about his past life, and he realized the great need he had to do penance for it. Without giving any consideration to his present circumstance, he promised to do, with God's grace, what the saints had done. So he did later in his life have access to a book called, the author is Thomas A. Kempis, and it's called The Imitation of Christ. And it's just a really interesting thing, you know, when you think about, I never liked the title because I thought imitation, that means fake. right? Imitate, but what they were really saying is that you set up Christ as your hero, and then you try to emulate his behavior, his thinking, his speech, the way he dealt with other people, his behavior. And um, I just find that interesting that when you get into Bill's story, he talks about his heroes were the chemists and the business people, the engineers, the people that were doing things with stuff. His intellectual heroes, I think he called them. Um, and just in thinking about heroes, I feel like we all have a certain, no, I won't speak for you. I know I've had a hero. I've wanted to be a hero. I'd love a national holiday and a parade or something like that. Just get the recognition of, oh, you did something really good here. But I know now that my need for a hero, my need for heroes, is really much more important than my need to be a hero. And certainly, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob are heroes for me because they solved a problem that the world couldn't solve. The problem of alcoholism, and they did it by understanding the three parts of our disease: the physical part, that we're not normal, safe drinkers. We can't afford to take the first drink. The mental part, that we need the relief of alcohol so badly that we block out of our minds that we can't. That if we take the first drink, we're getting drunk. And then the spiritual malady, which just means I can only self-rely because I don't have God in my life to rely on. Any rate, so at this moment, Ignatius gets this desire to go to Jerusalem as soon as he was well, in order to observe all the fasts and to practice all the disciplines any generous soul on fire with God usually wants to do. Those are his own words when he's describing his life. So he's laying there, butchered with a gimp leg that bothers him because he won't be able to be a dashing knight in tights or whatever. And he starts thinking, nope, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to leave where I am. I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and try to imitate the actions of the saints. At some point around this, this is called Our Lady's Visit. Again, these are going to be his own words. So it seemed that all the fantasies he'd previously pictured in his mind gradually faded away before the holy desires he now had. My mind just jumped to Bill's one of his spiritual awakenings, and he talks about it melting the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow he shivered or whatever, and he feels this clean, clear wind blowing through him. It's a wonderful description, and it's more fully done in Pass It On, Bill's biography. I think it's important for us to acknowledge these experiences, because unless you think they're lying, you really got to ask yourself, do I want this? Do I want to experience an intimate relationship with my spiritual creator? I'm going to jump, but I know where I'm coming back to. So, you'll hear in meetings, don't leave before the miracle. And many times people will cite the miracle in the 10th step promises, where it's talking about, we'll see that we're not even thinking about drinking. The problem has been removed, and that's a miracle. Well, it is. And it's the first level. The next level of miracle in our book, I believe, is when he says, it's earlier, it's way earlier. Our consciousness of the presence of God in our lives is the most important fact of our lives. That's a miracle too. When all of a sudden I'm more focused on my relationship with my creator, than I am with the other stuff of my human life. And there's a third level. It's the third level is in the fifth step promises, at least for me. Um, we will feel as though we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. I mean, that to me, I feel I've gotten to my relationship with God is the most important fact in my life. I can say that. I don't think I would have said that 3, 4 years ago. I'm not sure, but I can say it today and not feel like I'm, any rate. Uh, but what I want, I want to feel I'm on the broad highway. Remember, it's written before interstates existed. On the broad highway, no stoplights or obstructions, no slow traffic. I'm going somewhere on the broad highway, walking hand in hand. Walking is important. I'm walking under my own propulsion, but hand in hand with the spirit of the universe in partnership. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to be, at least for me, to be aiming toward. It's just that most of us don't want to do what the writers of the book said they did. Certainly, I don't want to do what Ignatius did, but what the authors of the book said they did to get there. So, here he's still laying around. This is before he leaves the castle. It seemed that all the fantasies he previously had pictured in his mind gradually faded away before the holy desires he now had. One night, as he lay sleepless, he clearly saw the likeness of Our Lady with the Holy Child Jesus. From this vision, he received great consolation for a remarkably long time. He felt so great a disgust for all his past life, especially for his sexual misdeeds, that it seemed to him that all the fantasies that had been previously imprinted on his mind were now erased. Thus, from that hour until August 1553, when this is being written, this is his own words, he never again gave the slightest consent to temptations against chastity. For this reason, the vision may be considered the work of God, although he did not dare claim it to be so. So that's his own words of describing what he went through. And as I tried to indicate before, I think he loved to drink from what I've read, but I don't think he was alcoholic. But he could well have used, what do we call it, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SLAA. I don't know. Vanquished by God. That's this next section, and just as the following up on the, though he did not dare say with certainty that it came from God, on the other hand, he positively states the exceptional and lasting effects that resulted from it. He was convinced that so radical a transformation could not have come about as a result of his own efforts or his natural inclinations. This was the moment in his life when he became a convert, a man in need of profound redemption, a man driven to find ways to make up for lost time. So, in his in the next time that we meet, we'll start going into what happens after this point. He's going to leave the castle. He's going to give up his clothing and wear a sackcloth tunic and start wandering alone and on foot. That's the title of this book. And so I'm going to ask Robin to stop the recording, and we're going to have some open discussion. Thank you for being here.